This week, Kumar and Emmet discuss the movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, recount the history of the property, share their memories of the Turtles, and compare this film with past iterations of the Turtles. We hope you'll spread the word about Deconstructing Comics. Tell your friends about us, share episodes on social media, and also send us suggestions for topics we could cover. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com.
This is Emmet.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Emmet in Country Victoria, on the line with Kumar out in the suburbs of Melbourne. How are things?
Pretty good.
We are going to be having a wee chat about the latest Turtles movie, Mutant Mayhem.
I think it's Turtles 7.
I mean, do we count? Like, there's so many of them, and potentially you got TV movies in the mix as well, which can confuse things even more.
I'm just counting theatrical releases. I think this is the 7th one.
Does that include the Turtles and Batman film?
Oh no! Was that a theatrical release?
I believe it got theatrical release.
Whoa! Okay. Wow. I
could be wrong, but I believe it did. So we caught a preview of the latest film, the Seth Rogen produced, voiced, etc.
Written, but it's a preview. It's a preview for us because it's not got wide release in Australia, but everywhere else it has gotten wide release already.
It's come out in the States.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think we're not quite timely as such, but we still felt we should do something, particularly because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
Growing up in Ireland, I was under the fiat of the UK declaration that there were hero turtles. They didn't want,
and there were no
nunchucks. No nunchucks, no ninja stars, no swords.
There weren't even swords.
Well, no, as in they did not want children playing with these things.
Yeah.
That's why. And I've always found that funny because, you know, at the same time, growing up, I mean, there was a Rambo toy line. There was an A-Team toy line. You got, heavily armored white dudes with semi-automatic weapons.
Yeah.
That's fine. But teenagers with ninja stars was apparently not something children should be playing with. Anyway,
I think Rambo was a colonial, maybe, and he was a colonizer.
That's fine.
Thematically, maybe that's why he was allowed through subconsciously.
He's a proud supporter of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, as we know from from the disclaimer to that film.
Yeah,
proud people of Afghanistan. Watch Rambo. Is it Rambo 3? Watch Rambo 3.
That's
again.
Rambo 3. That's the Afghanistan one. Yeah.
See, I think you need to find a VHS from back in the day to actually see. I think they've removed it.
Okay.
Anyway, the reason I bring all that up is because the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie is still considered one of the most successful comic book adaptations, but also one of the most successful independent movies.
Right, okay.
It wasn't a studio release.
Right.
So it actually made a huge amount of money, and that's why I believe Turtles is still with us, because Turtles was also a huge indie comic success.
Yeah.
And then it became more of a corporate product. You had the animated show. You had the Pizza Hut special deal with the Turtles. You had, I think they had they served a special custom Ninja Turtles pizza when I was a kid that had sort of weed on it. Like it was all meant to be. And when we went to the screening, they were serving slices of pizza with what looked like food dye.
Yeah.
Liberally sprayed over the cheese.
Mutant ooze.
There you go. Your ooze. So anyway, the Turtles has been with us for decades now.
1984 it started, so we're 1 year away from the 40th anniversary.
Which is incredible.
That is shocking to think back, because I knew Turtles from the comics. And I don't know what stage I became familiar with it, but certainly there was a role-playing game in 85. I played that a lot. I think that might have been a little bit later. But I remember I saw the cartoon when it first came on in 87, and I was very disappointed. I was really looking forward to it, and it was so unlike the comics in terms of being really kiddie, and like they were using their weapons to knock stuff over, like barrels and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is not, because the comic was very violent, gory. You'd see like blood sprays. This was all ripped off or a parody or homage to Frank Miller's Daredevil and the Chris Claremont Frank Miller Wolverine series. There's panels or exact swipes from that especially. And those Daredevil had the Hand Ninja Clan and TMNT had the Foot Ninja Clan.
Yes.
And but I loved it, and it had this weird thick line, like thick inking style. Had a kind of gritty feel, but it very much felt like you could really feel coming through that this was two dudes in their apartment just kind of coming up with this thing on their own. You really got a sense of that. And I bought it was reprinted in color by First Comics, and I bought those. Those are the versions that I read. But actually, going back, I prefer the duotone black and white versions. I think they still look really great. I still reread them sometimes. But in '87, the cartoon came out, and I was like, this is weird, some weird kids thing. But, as you just said, it became so huge that the original was kind of, I think it's gone. I think Eastman and Laird only did 15 issues total before they had to give up. They just had to stop because they owned it. They were the owners of this property. It was really, in a sense, utopian or idealist, but because they owned it, they were responsible for all the business side of it, and then suddenly they were doing 16 hours a day of business and could not write or draw anymore. And then here we are, 40 years later, it's still going. I don't think either of them have any ownership in it. I think they sold. And even in the Comics Journal interview from '99, Eastman said they had agreed that if the right offer came along, they would just sell it outright. And I think they sold it to Nickelodeon or Viacom or something like that. I'm going to say within the last 5 or 10 years. But I was curious because I think I'm about 5-6 years older than you are. So I was pretty pissed off by this cartoon, but it must have hit just right for you, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah, it was the business for me. Yeah, absolutely. And I even have a memory of being in a bookstore in Galway, Eason's bookstore in Galway, and they had the trade of the original black and white Turtles comic. So this must have been late 80s.
Okay.
And I picked it off the shelf and I flicked through a few pages and I saw all the stabbing and the ninjas and the brain people living in chest cavities. Yes. And I just felt sickened. I remember I felt sick, revulsion.
Even the art, even the line style, I think would turn off a kid. There's something about it that's not heavy. Appealing for a kid.
Yeah, it's ugly and it's kind of gross. And I imagine if I traveled back in time and handed that same Emmet a copy of Doro Hedoro and say, don't worry, you're going to love this. You're going to think this is incredible in a couple of years' time. Yeah. Oh, this looks like a mess. Similar sort of scratchy art, in fact. I was sort of reminded of the sort of punkish sensibility of Doro Hedoro, but Doro Hedoro is still much more sophisticated than this is.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, there's a lot of... not only is the premise of the book itself parody, but the art is, as you say, lifted and sourced from all these other
and there were guys they haven't been drawing for very long, and in story terms, I mean, this was meant to be a one-off, a one-shot. They never thought about it a second issue.
It's clearly an ash can.
And I also think it's very much like Star Wars, which is just supposed to be a nostalgic throwback to Flash Gordon. And it's only supposed to be one, and then as soon as you do a second one, it mutates, so to speak, into something completely different. As soon as if you have a nostalgia property, and as soon as you do a sequel to that and try to make it its own thing, that's when things start changing. But I mean, they had success somehow right out of the gate. I think they were just advertising in Comics Buyer's Guide. They didn't even have like real distribution. They were getting like phone orders for this thing and they sold like 9,000 copies. Made $200 profit on the first issue, and then the sales just kept going up and up. So even the comic was a success enough that in 1985, 1 year later, the role-playing game was already out. And And this is, 2 years before the cartoon comes out, and things really go crazy. And the licensing deal, I think actually it was Playmates, the toy company, wanted the toys, and much like He-Man, the cartoon was there to advertise the toys.
Yeah, and so many of the concepts that came out of the cartoon are clearly there to sell a toy.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons why I like the new movie, because I feel like that sort of embraces all those characters and then makes that the story. Like,
yes.
Where are all these characters coming from?
Yeah.
Let's meet them all at once. Let's not drip feed them to the audience. They're all here. Paul Rudd, introducing this young actor called Paul Rudd.
It's very toyetic, the movie.
Incredibly toyetic, yeah. And I feel it's self-consciously toyetic,
yes.
as you say, because that was what the engine of a lot of the properties related to Turtles at a certain point became about, selling turtles to kids.
Yeah.
You slap a Turtles logo on a pizza box and you sell more pizza boxes. But yeah, the movie, I feel, does a really good job of synthesizing all of these sort of complicated feelings you may have about Turtles. And not just nostalgia for nostalgia's sake, but also, hey, what were we putting on our brains when we were reading these comics or watching this animated series? And it just touches on all these different things. And I think it does a really good job of presenting all of this in a way that actually makes narrative sense. So as an overall movie experience, I really enjoyed it. But I was impressed how much, like, right from the first scene, they're making little nods to the comic book. Yeah.
Well, even so, issue 1 of that first Mirage comic by Eastman and Laird, the Turtles are out on their first mission. They're out beating up guys in an alley. Then they go home, and then Shredder tells them their origin story once they get home. And they.
But let's just stop for a second.
Yeah.
So they kill a bunch of dudes.
Yeah.
Like, they kill street toughs.
Yeah.
So this is 1984. So we're still in the sort of Bernard Goetz street vigilante, let's murder black teenagers and call it a day era. Casey Jones is very much a sort of throwback to that character as well. They did the lone man who just can't take it anymore, and he's going to go out and he's going to avenge. Now, the Turtles, we meet them beating the crap out of these. I think they're teenagers, but again, they're portrayed like men. They look like men, but they're teenagers. And they murder a bunch of them. And they're not nice people, but like this is how the story starts. They're killing a bunch of dudes. And then they go home to Splinter, and Splinter congratulates them.
Yes.
Because he's like, well done. You're now at the apex of your abilities. And I love the contrast in the movie, because the movie, it's Jackie Chan as Splinter, is like, he's just a doting father who wonders where they've been all night.
Yes, and he doesn't want them going out. He doesn't want them interacting. And
he taught them ninjutsu for self-defense. If they're ever caught in a corner and they can get out of it. That's why they're not meant to go out and actually kill people.
Yes, so when we get the backstory in the comic, it's this whole revenge story about these ninjas in Japan that were killing each other over a woman with a Chinese name for some reason.
Yeah.
But so this is the first nod of something. As much as I enjoyed this movie, it was funny beginning to end. It's very traditionally structured in the sense that, the dad doesn't want them to go out, so there's a conflict. Instead of, and there's no revenge plot, this ancient Japanese revenge plot. Instead, it's a very conventional, dad doesn't want the kids going out, so they have to start sneaking out. So there's your first act conflict right there.
It's funny, actually, because I feel like Ice Cube Superfly is the hero of his own movie.
Yes.
And for him, it is a revenge plot. Like, the villain
That's right.
actually has cause. Like, he's got a legitimate reason to be angry.
Yeah.
His father was murdered. He gets Splinter from the comics story, in effect, because he witnessed the murder and everything. He was there.
Yeah.
And he then goes off on this vengeance quest. And the point of separation in the film is when the four turtles they're coming along with him to a certain point, going, yeah, okay, cool, this sounds good, yeah, this is great. And then whoa, what?
Yeah.
And no spoilers for the listeners, but I kind of feel the fact that the movie keeps drawing that connection between Superfly and Splinter, like, it literally states it outright.
Yes.
I feel that was a conscious choice to lift some of those elements, the sort of morally flippant a murder of the comic book and then place that within the wheelhouse of the film of the movie.
Yes, but it's also a direct parallel to Magneto Professor X, which goes back to Malcolm X, Martin Luther King.
I hate that comparison, but yes.
I hate it too, but it's been said even by Stan Lee. And the thing is...
Well, he's not someone who we should ever listen to.
No, well, but it's... I mean, this movie, I don't think it's conscious about it, but by having... We have a plot here. Again, this is a bit of a major spoiler maybe, but as we said, it's got a conventional superhero movie plot. And we've got the villain's endgame is very similar to Magneto's endgame in the first X-Men movie.
The Bryan Singer movie.
Bryan Singer movie. Now, okay, that's fine, but if you're going to say that... And this movie leans heavily into the mutants being a kind of racial analogy.
They're another.
Yes. Yeah. And to cast Ice Cube as the villain who's going to take revenge by enslaving humanity and making them... that has a certain coloring to it, which is maybe not intentional. I mean, if they cast... Well, let's say in X-Men, you got a homosexual actor playing the Magneto role, but it's not obvious when you're watching it, you know what I mean? But you hear Ice Cube's voice, and you're like, that's Ice Cube. So there's something going on there. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's really interesting. It's very interesting that
the Black Panther sequel that came out, Wakanda Forever, had a very similar problem because you've got the idea of the Wakandans fighting the Atlanteans.
Yeah.
They have a different name. I've forgotten the name offhand. They're fighting these underwater people who are coded as South American Aztec people.
Okay.
And then you've got the African nation. And then it's a war between these two groups. There is a moment at the start of Wakanda Forever where we learn that the America and France really gets it, are trying to like invade Wakanda or steal its technology and interrupt Wakanda's rich success and steal it for themselves. Really, it's France though, and but that's it. That's where that plot ends, and then the rest of it is these two warring factions of people of color.
Right.
And if you watch the movie, who each directly as part of their narratives are hostile to colonial powers and refuse the yoke of colonialism and have actually thrived without it and clearly represent another way of the world operating as a civilization, and yet we just see them kick the crap out of each other and murder each other and kill each other for 2 hours of movie time. And I was really bothered about the fact that Superfly and his coterie again are like these antagonists who will target the Turtles. And I thought the movie was going to go a different way and maybe frustrate that, that conventional plot. And it didn't. But it's sort of pulled back from going all the way. There was a sort of, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but there was a sense of, well, we can't have these othered people all just wipe each other out. There needs to be some reflection on the fact that they are all that each other has, really. And part of the motivation for the characters is wanting to be accepted by mainstream society.
Yeah.
That's the main thrust. Now, in the original comics, that's not a concern at all because they're ninja. They live in the shadows. They don't care about society.
Yeah.
Whereas in the movie, that is a chief part of the fact that these voice actors were teenagers makes such a difference to the plot and to your experience of the story. And then we learned they really want to go to high school because all the culture they've absorbed from the margins tells them that high school is great. They want to be in a John Hughes movie. Desperately want to be in a John Hughes movie.
Literally.
Literally.
Because we do get a very funny live action insert when they go to the movies at one stage. Yes, that teen thing is interesting, or the way they've made them teens is because in the original Eastman Laird comic, that very first issue at least, they basically sound like Splinter. I don't know if it was just because of their limited ability to write dialogue, or they were trying to make it sound highfalutin like a Chris Claremont comic, but the Turtles basically sound like they've only ever spoken to Splinter, and they have his kind of stiff way of speaking. Whereas in this, these kids have been on their phones a lot, and they've absorbed all this kind of culture. Yes. So they play very differently, and even in the. It takes a long time for the characters to be distinguished from each other in the original comics. They're basically like Huey, Louie, and Dewey. They're just 4 turtles. The only difference is their weapons. It's not until you get we get a hint that that Raphael likes violence. He likes a fight. More aggressive. I think we get Donatello starts tinkering with electronics computers in issue 2.
Yeah, he knows the technology, so he helps April with April, who's a computer scientist,
right?
Not a journalist, which I've forgotten.
That's right. And then she inherits a second-hand shop from her uncle or something by issue 3 or 4.
She's all the professions.
Yeah,
but yeah, Donatello has interest in computers, and Michelangelo at one point was left behind by the others. And also Michelangelo is here, right. And there was this sort of sense of he's the spare.
Yeah.
Almost, you know?
Yeah.
More Turtles talk coming up, but now announcing the potential Patreon-only podcast topics which $4 and up patrons will be able to vote for starting September 23rd. The topics are 1. Captain Marvel by Jim Starlin, 2. 1970s occult Marvel, including Doctor Strange, early Spider-Woman, Werewolf by Night, Ghost Rider, Son of Satan, and more. Number 3, Cap in the Nixon era, Captain America and the Falcon, issues 153 to 186 by Steve Englehart. Or 4, Silver Age Batman, the era that's debatably goofier than Batman 66. Remember, you can only vote and only hear the podcast on the winning topic if you support this show for at least $4 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics. And you'll also get access to our discussion of the first 50 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, including annuals and Spidey's origin story in Amazing Fantasy 15. Join us today at patreon.com/deconcomics. Edward and Alphonse Elric, as a result of attempting the forbidden act of resurrecting their mother with alchemy, have paid the price. Edward lost an arm and a leg. Alphonse lost his whole body, his soul now attached to a suit of armor. Together they search for a way to make their bodies complete again and uncover a deadly plot by their country's military rulers. That's the concept of Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga ever made. Tim and Patrick are rereading Arakawa's masterwork in search of interesting sound effects, translation errors, goofy humor, and, oh yeah, a great story. The podcast is The Law of Equivalent Exchange, a chapter-by-chapter look at the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. New episodes every other Monday, wherever podcasts are found. What are you willing to exchange?
So some of those things they got really expanded in the cartoon, where we have different colored masks. We've got the letter on the belt of their first initial. So all that stuff's kind of come through, and some stuff which, because there have been so many iterations, we have 5 different TV shows, the 7 movies. So there were some things which you picked up on, which I didn't, which is like the size of Raphael and maybe Donatello wearing glasses.
That's the Michael Bay movies. Yeah.
Okay. And so it was kind of like accruing stuff, or maybe they were not. We get to hear the Vanilla Ice song from the second
Turtles very
briefly. I was surprised. They're not throwing any of this stuff out. I think Seth Rogen is really, I don't know how old he is, probably our age. So it probably would have hit for him in the same way that he's got to put all this, every version in there in whatever capacity he can.
Well, you mentioned Seth Rogen, so I now have an opportunity to quiz you on something, because you, Kumar, are a Canadian.
Yes.
So you can enlighten me on
this.
So, Canada.
Yeah.
1990s.
Yes.
Are you guys like really into 90s hip hop? Is that really like a major thing? Is that a major Canadian thing?
I'm gonna say yes because we had at least 2 white rappers out of Toronto.
Snow
And another guy called Kish, who's obviously way down the ladder, but they were kind of coming out of the... I think because we had a lot of immigration from Jamaica up to Toronto, so Toronto was outputting these white rappers. Maybe that was it. But definitely that was... Yeah, you get a 90s vibe from and an 80s vibe through this movie. Every decade is going to represent in some form. And through the music, yeah, I definitely think it was a big deal.
Yeah, again, for the folks listening, the reason I bring this up is because the soundtrack to this movie is incredible. Like, you've got De La Soul, you've got Tribe Called Quest.
Yeah.
There's a very funny Four Non Blondes bit that I really enjoyed. You also have like more recent stuff, like MF Doom is on the soundtrack too, which was great.
Well, when it started, I was like, so often if, I go to all these movies and there's a lot of hip hop on the soundtrack and it's not my scene. So I'm like, I don't care. I'm just going to dismiss it. And when the music started in the movie, it's like, okay, whatever. It's going to have that kind of music. But it was not consistent that way. It was varied. So I kind of got sucked into it like more than I expected to, the soundtrack of it.
I have not heard Blackstreet's with Dr. Dre, No Diggity. In at least a decade.
Yeah.
Maybe more. I have not heard it in years.
Yeah.
And it comes through in this movie in a barnstormer of a scene that's just so good.
Yeah.
It plays so well on screen. And I thought, this is just really well scored. These are great choices of songs. But you're right, they're so synonymous with the time. You really feel a sense of the 90s. I mean, the flashback scene helps too, because Splinter has a haircut that just made me laugh out loud. Yeah. But the sense of the 90s and the sense of like sitting in front of my television watching a Turtles cartoon, or going to the Savoy Cinema in Dublin watching the first Ninja Turtles movie, I was around for that. And then watching this movie, I had this sense of, this is aimed squarely at the heartstrings of parents who are bringing their kids to this movie and were of that age. And then you've got these young actors playing these characters, and I think kids will really resonate. It will really resonate with them because they sound young. Yeah. And a lot of the humor that the kids have in this movie actually feels like kid humor, like digital native kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's very smart how they've done that. Like, if this had been a period piece, if this had been an 80s animated film, I don't think it would just been another Turtles movie. It wouldn't have actually distinguished itself.
Yeah. I'll tell you what hit me, a couple of things. It wasn't 90s or current. It was, we get some live action clips from Jackie Chan's Young Master and maybe Drunken Master as well. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. I almost jumped out of my seat. And there's another moment when Ice Cube knocks in a van door and he delivers the Ice-T song 6 a.m. and I was like, I love that bit. That's for me, that was like my 80s hip-hop was Ice-T. I listened to that album in particular over and over again, and I really dug that. And this is the first time I was really satisfied. They went for a very idiosyncratic art style. It looks like everything's been carved out of pastel crayons. And you look at the CGI version that came out maybe 15 years ago, and it looks very generic. And we had the weird rubber costumes. I'm not sure how I felt about those. This, for the first time, feels like something that's kind of rough and very distinct, like those comics were. So the first time I was like, I'm really enjoying looking at this for 2 hours, and it never tired me out. Although it was very clear that this movie couldn't have happened without the Spider-Verse, the success of that. If that had happened, we would probably be looking at a generic CGI movie if this came out at all. But to have it in this very unique, very interesting to look at consistently was really made it very easy for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been checking out some of the more recent comics. There was an IDW series from a few years ago.
Yes, I think they're currently IDW is the publisher of Turtles comics. Yeah.
And the hook now is, at the first issue, the hook was that Raphael's left. Raphael's walking the earth.
Oh, okay.
He's doing the whole kung fu thing.
Yeah.
And then there's this extended fight scene with a Catman and it's like the turtles are fighting Black Sad.
Right.
This is crazy.
Right.
But it's funny because one of the lads is still involved in the writing, and I feel like that the problems that he originally had are still there. Like, Eastman is still like rifling through the same box of references.
Okay,
It's
right.
like contemporary comic, but I feel like there's like a limited scope to some of the Turtles comics.
I feel like they've come back, like Laird or Eastman have come back one or the other to do some writing at various stages. And I feel like based on the Eastman interview from the Journal, it sounds like Peter Laird, who's 8 years older than Eastman, felt the hurt more of the distance of the turtle. Like when they became corporatized, he was the one that was feeling it more than Eastman was, who was less sentimental about it, I guess you could say. But I feel like I wish I could remember which one of them held on to it longer and which one sold their share quicker. But yeah, they've seemed to be like, now that they're not having to worry about $50 million a year, they actually have time to write some Turtle comics from time to time.
They even did the Old Man Logan riff, where they had the Old Man Turtle.
Okay.
It's still like an empty calories parody comic.
Right.
Like it's
right.
and I'm not trying to knock them while they're down or anything, because they're tremendously successful and they're still here. They keep making Turtles books, but I just felt the movie managed to touch on those things, but somehow be more meaningful to me. Like there was this sense of it actually having weight, despite the fact that, as you say, it still rests on a traditional superhero movie plot structure, complete with the big imbroglio at the end of the movie, which I could have done without, frankly. But
you could tell it was coming because the way they shot the fight with Superfly, the villain. I said Superbad because I was thinking of Seth Rogen. I thought of Superbad the whole way watching this. I was like, these kids are they're a little bit younger, but they're almost like the Superbad kids. Like Rogen's going for that kind of. Anyway, so they fight Superfly, and I could just tell from the way it was shot and the tempo or the music or something. I was like, when they beat this guy, that's not the end of the movie. There's going to be another thing, a bigger thing that's going to be another 15 minutes of screen time. I could feel it coming on. That was a bit of a disappointment, but I mean,
yeah, because I really like, that's what I was getting at before when I was talking about like frustrating that sense of the other people then having to turn on one another. That there was this moment of unity that seemed to be approaching, and I was going, this is going to be beautiful, man. I'm really going to love this when it lands.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait for this plane to land.
So you thought they were going to like talk Superfly out of it, like turn him over to their side, and that was going to be the kind of resolution?
More or less, yeah. Or not, my thing was that all of them, to one degree or another, want acceptance. They keep talking about it. And I wanted them to, at one point, just go, screw acceptance. Let's just do our own thing. Let's live under the cities. We take what we want. We do what we want. We have our little network.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Like the Jeff Wayne song, The War of the Worlds musical. Let's live underground. But Phil Lynott then comes on his guitar. Yeah. I thought that's where things were going. I thought it was going to be, well, let's just reject this society. And April, you can come too. April's amazing at this, by the way, as well. Like I really like the performance.
Was the like teenage April also from a previous iteration? I feel like one of the TV shows I flipped channels and there was like a teen version of April instead of.
There might have been a teenager April. I haven't finished that one. I knew her from the movie and the Hero Turtles cartoon as an established journalist, like a television journalist.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a shock to read the first comic and go, it wasn't even the first issue. She's not in the first issue, the second issue.
Yeah.
She's a computer scientist.
Yeah, Baxter Stockman's like assistant almost, yeah.
Yeah. Well, not even, that's how he'd probably term it.
Yeah, she's his programmer, yeah.
She's coded the technology he's using. Yeah. And Baxter appears in this too, and I kind of, where that landed, I wasn't sure if we're going to see him again. he's an interesting character.
Yeah.
And I did find it interesting that like the movie and the cartoons show immediately whitewashed April. Like she's now a white woman. Whereas in the comic, supposedly she was meant to resemble the partner of one of the creators who was an Asian woman.
Oh, interesting.
So you have as an antagonist in the second issue, a black man, and as a hero, an Asian woman.
Oh, right. Okay.
Who's then, sexualized a lot in a couple of panels. And I was going,
yeah,
this is young people made this. Young men made this. There's an egregious tit shot of a woman who gets knocked into a park stream at one point, and I was like, what? Why is this even in here? People getting excited by it. This is not Tango and Cash. Egregious tit shot. But yeah, she was this Asian woman, and I think that the adaptations erased that idea. I find that really interesting. So here in the animated movie, she's a young black woman.
Yeah. And
there was this, as expected, fan tumult.
Okay.
For saying, "Oh, they're making turtles woke," and number one, turtles will never be woke. They're turtles. But
yeah.
Two, she already was a person of color from the jump. That was the original character.
But to be fair to the cartoon, I don't think it was very clear reading those comics what her race was.
Unfortunately, their illustration skills let them down a bit. But yeah, I think that idea of April's race being a controversy was pretty much the only thing I was hearing about this.
Okay, weird.
Movie until really not too long ago. And then when it came out in the States, I started hearing people talk about it in podcasts or people talking about in interviews saying this is actually really good.
Yeah.
And
it's got the highest Tomatoes score. It's got 90%. And I think the highest of any of the previous 7 movies is 15, 16, 20%, something like that. Yeah.
Wow. Even the first one? The first one's still good.
When the first one came out, again, I don't know how I feel about the rubber suits, but I did like that it was closer to the comics than the cartoon was, in terms of the story and all that revenge stuff. But there were certain things about that first movie, which came out in 90 or 91. So there's a scene in the issue 1 where Splinter explains how he lived with he was a pet of this Japanese ninja guy, and he copied his movements when his master was training. And I'm like, wait a second, why is this rat intelligent in the first place? It's never explained. He hasn't been mutated. He's just a rat. But there's a really funny panel, I think it's deliberately funny, of the rat mimicking his master doing martial arts.
Yes.
And I think it's a parody of all the Marvels they were reading or whatever.
Yeah.
That scene is in that first movie, and it looks really weird and ridiculous, and I'm not sure if it was meant to be deliberately goofy in the movie, but it is because it's the best they could do anyway. So there's some weird stuff going on in that.
For the movie is fascinating. The first movie is fascinating because so much of it is, again, it's a non-studio movie, it's an independent movie, and the people involved in it, for them, a lot of the special effects work is a technical challenge.
Yeah.
It's let's actually get these actors to have, there's actual animatronics in the masks with the actor.
Yeah.
There's a person wearing the suit, but there's stuff, the actual expressiveness of the mask is due to animatronics.
I think it was Jim Henson's studio, right?
I think so. Okay. I think they were involved. And that really, so you can see them doing things like Splinter the Rat performing ninjutsu in his cage because we get to create a little rat monster, similar to the little rat monster in The Witches as well, when Angelica Houston gets turned into a witch. That was Jim Henson too. I feel like that's what that is. It's just there because they want to see how to do it.
Yeah.
And then they do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think if it was a studio picture, that scene would not be in the movie.
Yes, right.
Because it's weird.
Right. Yes, exactly. It's very weird. It's the identical shot of a rat in a cage doing ninjutsu, and I laughed for completely different reasons in the comic and in the movie. So I haven't watched that in a long while, but
well, I have can you guess which young actor makes an appearance in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? And I'll give you a hint.
Okay.
He has since appeared in Marvel superhero movies.
Oh. Okay, so we've got a child actor in it.
Young man.
Okay.
It's a man. I'll give you the gender.
Okay. Okay, who is it? It's not Corey Feldman because he's not in any Marvel movies.
No, because he died.
No, Corey Haim died. Corey Feldman still
Dog.
lives.
Corey's. Must you still curse
The two
me?
Coreys, yes.
30 years of being confused which Corey I'm talking about in any conversation. Sam Rockwell.
Really?
Sam Rockwell is in the Foot Clan. He's one of the teenage delinquents recruited by the Foot. He has lines. He has camera. He's actually got camera time.
Okay.
Face time on camera. And if you watch the movie, you can spot a young Sam Rockwell.
Whoa, I can't wait to watch it again.
And yeah, he was a villain in Iron Man 2, and he popped up in one of the other Marvel shorts with Ben Kingsley.
Right.
But yes, Sam Rockwell.
So did you come back to these Mirage did you only read them this week, or have you read them before?
I've read them...
After your first initial disgust as a child, did you ever come back around to them?
I know I've read them before.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you when, but I know I have. I've never owned them.
Yeah.
I've never physically owned them. I did buy, as a kid, I did collect, there was a UK-produced comic book, which was more in keeping with the cartoon series.
Okay.
I remember I used to collect those. And that was because they would be introducing these strange characters. There'd be these other mutant characters, and I would buy them to find out who the new mutant is. You know, that was always a sort of fun thing for me. They had a similar, I think it might have been a bumper. They used to do these sort of bumper anthology. No, like they would be fortnightly.
Okay.
And they would have Transformers, Ghostbusters, Doctor Who.
Whoa.
They would have them all in the one thing. I think it might have been called Bumper.
Okay.
I'm confused, but they used a Marvel UK collected books. But they weren't anthology. They weren't trades. They were on the shelves in the bookstore and the newsagent. I'm confusing myself now. And if I didn't make it into the newsagent on that Thursday afternoon, they were gone.
Right.
So like it was those days, when you miss an issue, that's it. You're not getting that issue. It's gone. But yes, I used to remember checking those out. I loved the cartoon, and I also remember it got me into skateboarding.
Oh,
skateboarding was a whole thing.
Yeah. Yes, I forgot about that completely. Yeah.
Skateboarding's less of a concern in this movie.
Yes, and I was worried there would be too much pizza stuff. There's quite a bit of pizza stuff in this movie, but it wasn't like I didn't get sick of it. Let's put it that. And there was they only say cowabunga, I think, once in the whole movie. So
the pizza stuff is hilarious because it's now more inspired by the meme of New York rats loving pizza slices. Right. The rats are stealing pizza slices.
Right.
Splinter loves pizza.
Yeah.
Splinter keeps serving
right.
pizza.
That's right.
They're
yes.
like going, not pizza again.
Yeah.
That's all they eat.
Yeah.
Anyway, I it was such a nostalgic rush for me watching this movie. But like I was pleasantly surprised we went to a screening where there were lots of kids. Parents brought their kids, and I was expecting...
We were dreading it. We were dreading being in the theater with hundreds of kids, but it's actually probably the ideal way to view it, because that's kind of the target audience.
They were vibing with it.
Yeah.
They were vibing. They weren't. I was afraid they'd be distracted. They'd have their phones out. They'd be playing games. They'd be talking. There were times where you could hear a pin drop. There were they were wrapped. And I was really impressed by that as well. Like it seemed to just plug into those two wavelengths of the adults in the room who would laugh at an Ice-T reference, like yourself. But other people around us were laughing at that. And I can't imagine that would fly over a kid's head. They don't know, gangster rap. But then there were bits with the 4 teenage turtles goofing off with doing some accents for too long.
Yeah.
They're just too long. But it felt like the kind of humor that kids who watch heavily edited video clips that go on for hours and hours on YouTube would get. Like, I think it's really... That's why I got on this mental track because of the... hey, I think Splinter is a nod to the New York rat meme. I literally think that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's what that's about.
Yeah.
I think we are now living in the era of meme culture, and the movie riffs on memes.
And the dialogue is so fast. It's really for TikTok kids. Like, I could not keep up with the Turtles half the time. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that it was so motor mouth fast that it was very hard for me, 48 years old, to keep up with them sometimes, which is normal with my own 15-year-old that I live with sometimes. I'm like, what's he talking about?
Yeah.
So what's your feeling about those Mirage comics? We've kind of talked about them a little bit. Because I've read them a lot of times, and they're not Shakespeare, but for some reason I come back to them, and I don't mind rereading them every once in a while.
It's rough for me, because like so like the comparison I would make would be to you've raised it already, but the Chris Claremont X-Men comics, which would have been the mutant part of the parody that's being sourced here. And, it's not an original comment to make that X-Men was a long-running soap opera. Yeah, that's what X-Men is. It's a soap opera when Chris Claremont is at the helm, because it's a singular voice. It's his vision and his cast of characters, which kept growing, and all these interconnections kept growing. And you read it now, and it's difficult to plug into as a book. You really need to have been reading it for years. And, for fans at the time, that would have been a feasible fandom, not as expensive as today. And it's difficult for me to read those books sometimes, because I'm coming into like a collected edition, and like it's a storyline or something. I'm just trying to, and it's like there's events happening that I don't have context for, and I'm going, oh, it's kind of boring. But there's still something there. They hum. Those stories still hum. Great art. Claremont, for all his purple prose, again, not an original observation, but he does introduce plot hooks that get you emotionally. There's stuff there that's really rich. And this has none of that. But it's making fun of, or lifting from, or trying to coast off of the success of X-Men, and Daredevil's the other ingredient. That urban, grimy, violent space that all these comics take place in, lots of fight scenes in sewers, mixture of kung fu movies and science fiction robot movies and aliens and all this kind of stuff, all happening at once. And this sort of rich gumbo of elements that you could find in many different places. And that's kind of the issue I've always had with the Turtles. I can get this elsewhere.
Yeah. I think, but maybe the thing that always gets me to, which I mentioned earlier, is the handmade kind of feel about it that really appeals to me. Maybe it's just the art style of it appeals to me as much as it's rough and ready. There's something about it that I think works for me, and maybe that's why I've come back to it so many times.
Even when Raphael, because he goes on walkabout, so I feel like that's become one of his core characteristics. He always leaves.
Yeah.
But he goes off on a day trip, and he runs into Casey Jones, and they have the inevitable two heroes meet and they start fighting. Like that's the old joke. That's the thing that gets referenced in Watchmen. Take a drink. That's the cliche of cliches of superhero comics. He refers to Casey Jones as a superhero at one point. He actually calls him a superhero. And when they have that fight, it just felt tired to me. But here's the thing: if I'd been of your age at that time reading that comic, it probably would have been awesome. This is I need to remind myself. Now it's really done to death. Now you really need to get away from that. The creators who are working for a lot of the big publishers who have these decades-long IP, they just keep recycling these beats. They keep running them into the ground. That's because that's what the customer wants. And it's so frustrating because, at the time of the original comics, you mentioned first published Nexus as well, like Laird and Steve Rude. And I keep coming back to Nexus. Because I feel like this is somebody who takes the iconography of the superhero and then wants to tell his science fiction space opera epic, and then wants to introduce his weird right-wing views about Soviet Russia and all the rest of it. But hey, it's an element, it's an ingredient, and it sets this whole thing off in a really interesting way, and at least it's original.
Yeah.
That's why I appreciate it. And of course, Steve Rude is such a master and incredible art.
Yes. So I think we're getting. I think based on what you're saying, I think you rate this movie that we just saw 2 days ago higher than the comics.
I think easily, because I feel it has the advantage of being able to look back.
Yes.
And, adapt the elements of the comic and the animated series and the movies that have clearly stood the test of time, but for a present day audience. And you nailed it before, where you were talking about how these young turtles are internet savvy. They're not speaking in bad pidgin English learned from kung fu movies.
Yeah.
Because that's what the people writing these comics back in the day would have been lifting from. This badly translated English dialogue in your Shaw Brothers films. They are kids who spend all their lives on the internet, and they've read all the websites, they've watched all the movies, they know who Mark Ruffalo is, and they will talk about him at length.
Yes.
That's who these kids are. They're kids, and I really enjoyed that. And I think it's fascinating to me that we call them Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but they're adults. They've always been adults.
They're even referred to as heroes in the movie, like the UK version.
Yeah.
A few times. It almost seemed to be a nod to that. Yeah.
Maybe you need to keep the trademark locked in.
Yeah. I think my feeling about it was I agree with you. I think it's in some sense it's not true to the comic, but in another, I mean, it almost doesn't matter because Eastman and Laird have accepted there's been many iterations since.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if it's going to, and I didn't like the structure of it, as we've mentioned, because it was just generic, but I do wonder if it's going to be dated in 10 years. Is it going to, like, all the current references are going to be forgotten? I don't know.
Because I caught a reference in the comic book when April, they have a getaway scene with the cops, and April and the Turtles manage to pull off a stunt, and they get away.
I had to Google that. Yeah. Is it some American race car driver or something?
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, who's this guy?
Who the hell is that?
Yeah, I had to Google it. Yeah.
That's the danger you run when you introduce contemporary references into your comic. Particularly if it's this canonical run that people are going to keep coming back to. Chris Claremont again loves his folk music. Chris Claremont loves his sort of traditional American indie folk music, and he would have cameos from performers. And I don't know who these people are, and I like folk music. Karen Dalton is amazing. She's not referenced in an X-Men comic, but he would reference these acts, and it takes you out of the reading because you're like, who's that?
Yeah.
I have to Google it now.
Yeah.
Interesting question. I think what they did smart was similar to a David Lynch movie, like Blue Velvet in particular. There were times watching this, I didn't know when it was happening. I wasn't entirely sure this wasn't taking place in the 90s. But then, of course...
Well, they had their phones. They've seen
Avengers Infinity War.
Yeah.
They got mobile phones. They got the internet. They got laptops. All right. But then the De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest...
Yeah.
Splinter's outfit, it's been 15 years. We're told it's 15 years' time when they were born to when we meet them.
Yes.
Which means this movie is taking place it starts from 2008 to today.
Yeah.
And that is not when everyone was listening to De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest and dressed up in those tie-dye shirts and stuff. That was not the case. That was the early 90s. But because they've done that and they've sort of touched on these visual cues from all these different decades and used these musical cues from the different decades, I think they've done a pretty interesting attempt at making it timeless. Because it's working on a parallel track for our generation and for the children of our generation. And you've got two audiences there.
Yeah.
So I can actually see this being something that these kids will grow up to love, and they'll keep watching it. And yeah, I can see it having that longevity because of that. That's smart to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's full of references.
Yes.
But maybe they'll survive.
Yeah. All right. Maybe that should be the last word. Is wondering where it will be in 10 years and where the Turtles will be. They'll probably I'm guessing we're gonna have another one.
Yeah, because we certainly lined up for one, and I was kind of disappointed when they had the tease as to what's going on next.
Yeah.
But let's end on this. So I caught Eastman High, so that's a reference.
Yes, and Laird was the name of there was a business or something called Laird. Maybe it was Laird Pizzas or something. Yeah.
Thank you. I was driving nuts. I was, where's Laird? Where's Laird?
Yeah. It was definitely in there before Eastman High. And Kevin Eastman does show up to do a voice of a character in there. So,
well, I'm glad the lads are still getting paid.
Yes, because they need the money.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem is now playing in the US, Australia, and many other countries. It comes out here in Japan on September 22nd. I was in college when the Turtles came out and was never the least bit into them, but I might go see this film anyway. If you're enjoying our weekly comics talk, consider supporting this podcast by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. That's also the address for submitting your own comics work for possible inclusion on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next time, Emmet and I at last pick up where we left off on Jack Kirby's Commandy, The Last Boy on Earth. We'll be discussing the final 3 issues Kirby wrote, 35 through 37. 2 of them are great, the other one not so much, but we'll talk about all 3 of them next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.